Whoa. Dude, that is a hell of a lead-in tune right there. I don't know if that's in your genre. You're a little bit younger than I am, Trent. But man, I remember back in the day, high school, you get your license, you're cruising around, listening to some Snoop Dogg, like Doggy Style, like that's, I don't know, man. Was that in your wheelhouse? How were you rolling around town when you first got your license? What was in the tape deck? What was in the CD player?
So I went through a little bit of phase of rock and roll, and then it's all country music, dude.
It as rock and roll. I'm gonna need a little more. I'm gonna need some specifics here. Are we talking like, were you a Ted Nugent guy type of rock and roll here? Like, where did you fall on the spectrum?
Give me some 3 Days Grace, a little bit of Nickelback.
Oh. Trent, I had so much hope. I had so much,
but that was a quick phase. It was a quick phase, man.
Granted, you were 16. You did just get your license. Maybe you grew out of it,
dude. I was jamming in that car.
Different strokes for different folks. No hating here on the Winged Helmet podcast. I'm glad we're back, man. I thought we had a good first show last week. Glad, obviously, that we're doing it with some consistency here. And look, I feel like we have, I feel like we got some good topics to cover tonight. And for as much as people may not be a fan of it, I think I'm going to check in first with the basketball program, and partially because it was announced today that Chrysler is going to start selling alcohol to fans, which I think is great for those in attendance who are going to watch this Michigan basketball program play, because I feel like alcohol will, if not enhance your enjoyment, at least minimize the misery of what the product is on the court. And I hate to be so critical, but look, man, things have not been good for the basketball program this year. The team has the worst record in the Big Ten Conference. They've got a losing record at home. They've lost the last four games by an average of 19 points. And it's going to be the second straight season that they've missed the NCAA tournament. And so, when you take all those things into account and you look at some of the other issues with the program, whether it be, the things that have happened with Juwan Howard, the Doug McDaniel stuff, not being able to land, top tier guys out of the portal, which is not Juwan Howard's fault necessarily, but it was brought up earlier that, like, at what point in time when you're Michigan do you stop chasing guys that are not going to clear admissions or that are not going to be able to get into the program? Like, how much of that falls on Juwan Howard? But ultimately, it's his fifth year as head basketball coach of the Michigan Wolverines, and over the last couple of weeks, there have been, the calls are growing louder for his time in Ann Arbor to come to an end. And Nick Stauskas, who is, there's no debate that he's one of the best basketball players to ever come through Ann Arbor, played under John Beilein, hell of a scorer, played for a national championship. I think it was after the loss to Purdue, which Michigan lost by, I think it was 30 plus points in that contest.
It was a ton.
Nick Stauskas took to social media, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's not an exact quote, but he basically said, look, I haven't seen a fire in this program in a long, long time. I haven't seen guys who are committed to being great. I don't see guys that take pride in wearing the Block M. And there were a lot of people within the fan base that resonated with. They felt that in their soul, and they believed in that, and you could see it. It was being reshared and reposted on social media. And then a few days ago, earlier this week, former Fab Five member Jimmy King issued his thoughts. Now, I don't know if it was a direct shot at Nick Stauskas. I don't know if that comment was what he was addressing specifically, but Jimmy King basically came out and said, look, like, I remember not too long ago, there were former football players who wanted Jim Harbaugh fired, who wanted Jim Harbaugh out of his job, and now they're celebrating the national championship like they never said anything like that. And basically what he was saying is, look, if you're somebody who's part of the program, was part of the program, you're part of the Michigan basketball family, and you got an issue with where things are, like, there's a certain way to address it. And it just kind of felt like he was taking issue with the way Nick Stauskas went about his business. And so I'm just going to ask you straight up, Trent, like, you watch basketball for better or worse. They kind of seem like they have the opposite problem of the Michigan football program, where they look okay in the first half, and in the second half, they completely fall apart. if you are Ward Manuel and you're sort of looking at everything and where it is right now, where do you stand on Juwan Howard and his future with the program as it stands now?
Yeah, so going what Jimmy King had to say, like I feel like Jim Harbaugh and Juwan Howard are going in two completely different directions here. Jim Harbaugh took over a very bad Michigan football program where Juwan landed a really nice gig where John Beeline had these guys going really far, you know? So yeah, he's in his 5th season. He's 7-14, I think. They didn't make the tournament last year either. I'm definitely kind of going there. I think we need a change in Ann Arbor. Like, I mean, so I saw a stat. The first half, Michigan's outscoring teams by like 3 or 4 points, and then they are one of the worst second half teams in all of basketball. And I don't know if it's because of roster construction or what it is, but I mean, all I know is they're not getting the job done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know. I know that a lot of it, you know, when you're the head coach, that's part of the job. Like a lot of it falls on your feet. A lot of it is your responsibility to make sure that things happen. And, you know, I don't know. I know for sure that Michigan basketball has an uphill battle when it comes to bringing in transfers. I know that Michigan basketball has an uphill battle when it comes to being able to utilize NIL, which is why Hunter Dickinson is no longer in Ann Arbor. I think that there are a lot of challenges that come along with being the head basketball coach at the University of Michigan. And I know that people like, you know, and they want to give John Beilein credit for what he did, and rightfully so. But Beilein got out at a time right before NIL became a thing, right before the transfer portal was a big thing. And so I think Juwan Howard is trying to navigate these waters, and I don't necessarily know that he has all the tools he needs in place to be successful. So I feel a little bit conflicted on it because personally, I don't know Juwan Howard as a person, but from what I've seen from him and my experiences and being around him, like he seems like a guy that you just can't help but root for, that you want to see succeed. And I think when he was hired and, you know, the whole thing with the Fab Five and his history with the University of Michigan and how grateful he was to, you know, to be able to take over a program like Michigan, you would just hate for that story to go this way. But I don't see it's becoming increasingly more difficult to see a scenario where Juwan Howard remains head coach after this season if things continue to go the direction they're going to go. And I think that's where I'm going to throw the question back to you. Do you think that there's anything that Juwan Howard can do for the remainder of the season that would maybe change your outlook and say, okay, he deserves another year to sort of fix things and get things back on track? Or do you think it's already too far gone?
No, I don't necessarily think that, but I got to see them finish. Like, how do you go from being one of the better first half teams in basketball to just absolutely terrible? And it's in every game basis too. And kind of going back to the recruiting, I have the recruiting rankings up right now. Last year, they were 12th in the nation. 2021, maybe. It's not loading. Anyway, my point is, I think Juwan is able to recruit. He's bringing in talent, but the problem is I don't think they're developing the players. Where like football, they weren't bringing in the high end players, but the coaching staff was able to develop these players. Where like right now, yeah, you're competitive, you're in the game, and then the second half comes and like you don't even look like you know how to play basketball.
Yeah, and I feel like, look, I've seen this point, George, from the Facebook page. I've seen this point brought up a number of times. And look, I don't want to minimize what it's like to have to go through heart surgery. You know, God willing, I'll never have to experience that. Trent, obviously, same about you, same about anybody you care about. I mean, that's a major thing to have to go through. And I don't think it's an easy thing to come back from. And from what I've heard reportedly, you know, the medication that you're on can sort of, you know, it can affect your mental a little bit. And so, but here's also where I stand with that. I don't know how much of the off-season heart surgery is responsible for what we're seeing on the court today. I think that there are some people that want to use that as an excuse and say, look, man, he went through a lot during the offseason. Let's give him some time. But I'm just not sure that the two things are really connected. I mean, at the end of the day, he still knows how to coach basketball. He's still, you know, he's got a staff in place that can recruit and that can do the job if he's not able to be there. I just don't think that the heart surgery portion of it is a reason why the Wolverines have the worst record in the conference. I think it's because they don't necessarily have the right players in place, and the good players they do have in place, like we've seen it in basketball before. Like, you can bring a ton of stars and put them on the same court, and they don't necessarily know how to play together. Like, it is, we've seen it with the football program. Like, culture means a lot. Buy-in means a lot. Commitment to the program means a lot. And that's how you get the most out of these guys. And it seems like those are the areas where the basketball program is lacking the most. And so, yeah, I mean, I sympathize and I agree. And I think that the heart surgery thing, I'm glad he was able to come back from it and he's back on the sidelines, but I'm just not so much, I don't know how much of an impact that's really having on what we're seeing on the court. Trent, do you give any credibility to that?
No, not really. But I want to ask you something. Do you think Michigan was more competitive? And granted, I know they weren't playing the Big Ten caliber teams now, but do you think Michigan was more competitive under Phil Martelli to start the year than they are right now?
Well, here's where I'm going to have to be honest, and I'm not proud of this honesty, but goddamn it, I'm going to give honesty anyway, Trent. I really wasn't watching the basketball team in the early part of the season because I was so focused on football, but I could go back and I could look at the record and see, but I mean, without watching the games, it's hard to say. I know that you watch basketball. What did you think with what you saw under Phil Martelli? Was it a different type of team with him leading the way?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I know that they aren't playing the caliber teams that they are now, but they were in the game, like from the first half, like they are now under Jawan, but it just seemed like they finished games stronger. Like now they just fall apart, like kind of like what CJ said earlier. They lose a lead and they just pack it in, just like against Michigan State the other night, man. They were right in the game, and second half comes out and Michigan State hits some shots. Michigan's done. Like they were done. The whole second half was a disaster.
Yeah. I guess here's where I'm at. Like, I get that it's not apples to apples, but Jim Harbaugh didn't hit his stride really until year 7. And look I get it. There was a lot more to rebuild. The football program was in a different place. I think it's harder to win in college football than it is to win in college basketball, generally speaking. If you can get yourself in the tournament, like anything can happen. We can see that. But in college football, man, like there's some juggernauts you've got to contend with within your conference, across the country. Like it is a tough thing to do what we just saw Michigan do. And so I don't know if it's fair, I get what Jimmy King said, and I can appreciate his perspective on it. And look, I feel like Nick Stauskas he's in a position where he's able to give his perspective, and I think Jimmy King is also within his right to do that as well. I just don't know that the two things are equal. And to your point, Trent, it does seem like things are trending in the wrong direction. Whereas with Harbaugh, after that 2020 season, it was sort of like make or break. You got to make it happen. And then he came out and made it happen in an incredible way. And maybe that's the way we transition from basketball. Listen, the good news to take away from the basketball conversation is that they're selling alcohol at Chrysler now. You can now go have a couple drinks and sit back and, and hope for the best and hope that they turn things around in Chrysler. So let's transition to football now, because Jim Harbaugh, this is weird, man. This was messing with my brain a little bit. He had his press conference today with the Los Angeles Chargers. He's got the suit on. He's got the powder blue behind him. He is all in on the Los Angeles Chargers. And I feel like it's one of those situations where, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, Trent. God bless you if you've never had to go through it. But if you've ever been in a relationship and you sort of broke up and then the person moved on and immediately was like with somebody else and in a really good situation, like it kind of hurts a little bit. And that's how I feel about Jim Harbaugh. But look, that's what he's doing. He's doing what he's supposed to do. He is 100% bought into making sure the Los Angeles Chargers are as good as they can possibly be. But it was weird. Like they were showing, they were panning through the facilities, and like up on the wall are like Jim Harbaugh's famous sayings, like an enthusiasm unknown to mankind, and better today than yesterday, better tomorrow than today. And it just the whole thing feels a little bit weird. But listen, here's what I want to ask. Let's start here first, because I don't know that a lot of people understand this. And Trent and I were talking about this before we went live. I stopped at the 1997 because, quite frankly, I just didn't have the energy to keep going back further. But I think there's a certain segment of the fan base that's really struggling with this transition because there has not been a head coach that has departed their football program, their college football program after winning a national championship in 30 years. It has not happened once since Michigan won a national championship back in 1997. So to put that in perspective, I mean, Urban Meyer with Florida, Bobby Bowden with Florida State, go through the names of the list of coaches who have won a national championship over the last 30 years. None of those guys, after that happened, had left the head coaching job. Usually the standard course of business is you come back and you look to build on it. And so I think that's why this whole thing has sort of felt surreal, because you spend so much time building a program and getting it to a point like this to sort of walk away feels strange. Now, Harbaugh's a little bit different, though. I don't know how many of those coaches had opportunities to go back and coach in the NFL the way that Jim Harbaugh did. So, now that you've taken some time to digest it, Trent, like, what is your thought on that transition, knowing that it hasn't happened since Michigan won their last national championship? Like, do you still feel the way about Harbaugh that you felt at the end of the season, or has this, 3.5 weeks or so really sort of changed your perspective on things?
Yeah, I'm glad you looked that up, because like I told you, when he left, I'm like, man, I just don't know that that's ever happened before. And like, I know you said you went back to 1997. It doesn't happen. Like, if your team wins the national championship, you probably lose some coordinators, but your head coach does not leave unless you're Jim Harbaugh. Like, that's just the type of guy that he is, man. And like, no, it hasn't changed my thinking about Harbaugh. I mean, for all that he's done for Michigan, I mean, he's going to go down as one of the greatest ever, if not the greatest ever.
And we'll talk about that here later in the show for sure.
But what's weird to me is he just won a national championship with Michigan, and everything, like, there's hardly even anything being said about Michigan. Like, he's like,
right, yeah.
I'll always be a loyal Wolverine, but like, that's it. Like, there's nothing being said about what he just accomplished. Like, he's looking at the Lombardi Trophy, and I realized, like, yeah, he's in Los Angeles now, and it's Harbaugh to a T, because that's how he is. He doesn't look at the past. He doesn't look at the future. Everything's the present with Jim Harbaugh, and it's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it. The way that it all happened is perfect Harbaugh. You know what I mean? He spent, how much time this season did he spend talking about one track mind? And I really feel like that's the way he lives. Once he made this decision, it's one track mind. Grateful for what happened in Michigan, but now I'm coaching the Los Angeles Chargers. Going to do whatever I can to make them successful.
I mean, he was like, there's nowhere else I'd rather be, but with the Chargers. Like, he has no.
Yeah, well, listen, Trent, people say things, and I sent this to you before, and I sent it to you in a text, but I'm like, don't we have a little bit of a right to be a little bit miffed here? Because look, after the Minnesota thing went down, it's well documented. You can go read it in the Detroit News. It's pretty much everywhere. It wasn't, secondhand relayed information. It was Jim Harbaugh himself relaying to Ward Manuel that he wanted to go check out an opportunity with Minnesota, explore the NFL. It didn't turn out. He came back to Michigan, said he wanted to be here as long as Michigan would have him. And he followed it up with saying, what was it, Trent? Saying, this is not a yearly thing. This was a one-time thing. I'm here at Michigan. And obviously that's not the case. And so, look, we want these guys to talk. We want to give them, we want them to give us information, but I also think that's part of the downside is you could say some shit that can come back to bite you in the ass 2 years later, especially if it's not necessarily 100% the truth. But you had mentioned this when we were talking about, what the ramifications are in losing a guy like Jim Harbaugh. And I think most of us we understand that when you leave, when a head coach leaves, that there are going to be other departures that come along with it. I think we knew that Jesse Minter was probably most likely headed back to the NFL. And by all accounts, Jay Harbaugh is probably going to follow his father out to Los Angeles. But you also hope for the people that are here that you're able to retain a lot of what helped build and establish that success. And I think that's why the news this week that Ben Herbert was departing hit everybody so hard. I mean, flat out, like, I didn't see any of the players really take to social media. And this is not, I don't want this to come off as like a a knock on Jesse Minter, because I think Jesse Minter is an incredible defensive coordinator. I think he's going to do phenomenally in the NFL. And by the way, shout out to Mike McDonald for taking over as head coach out in Seattle, reunited with former edge rusher Mike Morris out there. And so great opportunity for him. He was a critical part in helping the Michigan defense turn around. But you didn't see really Michigan players go to social media and sort of, make it seem like they were hit hard by Minter's departure. When it was announced that Ben Herbert was leaving, you could tell that it felt different. The fan base understood it. The players understood it. I think it was Mason Graham who said something to the effect of, "This one cuts deep." Rod Moore shared similar sentiments. Will Johnson on social media, Kenneth Grant on social. I mean, all of these guys who are expected to be a major component of Michigan's success in 2024, they were hurt by this. And I think it's because when you talk about Ben Herbert, this was a guy during the offseason that spent the most time with these players, preparing their bodies physically, preparing their minds mentally, like getting them right, getting them ready for battle. And when you lose somebody like that, who Harbaugh described as the X factor, who's been viewed as like the heartbeat of the football program, that's a huge, huge loss. And, is it Harbaugh's fault for wanting to take his best guys along with him to try to achieve what he can achieve in Los Angeles? No, but it certainly felt like that was a big loss for the football program. What went through your mind when you saw that come through? Did you expect it deep down, or was that a surprise?
So I expected the Harbaugh news, but no, I did not expect Herbert to follow him. I knew he was one of the higher paid guys at Michigan, and I feel like as a strength and conditioning coach, you can have a bigger impact, especially on the culture at the college level compared to the pros. You're talking about these guys that are making $30-40 million. At the end of the day, who's going to get fired, the players or the coaches? If you are at the college level, man, you can basically do what you need to do to get that program how you want it to be. So I was definitely surprised when he left. But again, like we talked about at the last show, like I didn't think Herbert was going to leave unless he had that loyalty to Harbaugh. And I feel like that's a big part of it. Harbaugh hired him, gave him that chance. Look what they did together. And he's like, hey, let's go try it out in the pros and see if we can do this again.
Yeah. I certainly didn't hide, my, the value that I placed on Ben Herbert. And I don't know if I said this on our last show, but if somebody said, can you put together your top 10 list of coaches you want to see retained at the University of Michigan, going into 2024, and this is including Harbaugh, I would have put Ben Herbert at the top, Jim Harbaugh number 2, Sharon Moore number 3. And that's not a knock against Sharon Moore, certainly not a knock against Jim Harbaugh. It's just I put a lot of value in who he was for this football program. And so I think that's why, it came off as big of a deal as it did, and why fans reacted the way they did, players reacted the way they did. But look, man, and I said the same thing about Jim Harbaugh, and he, on that CBS broadcast he did, it hit me really hard as somebody who's about to turn 40 this month. When he had said there's only a certain amount of sand left in the hourglass, I was like, I'm feeling that, because I'm going through the midlife crisis right now. It's in full effect. Like, I don't know, I might get hair plugs. I might see me rolling around with a wig. I might try to get a convert. I don't know what's coming next. I just know that it's all hitting me at once. And when a guy gets to a point in his life where he's achieved so much, and you get to a certain age and you realize like the chances of achieving other goals you've set for yourself are starting to run out. Like, I don't blame anybody for chasing that. And so, shout out to Harbaugh, wish him all the best. But yeah, I think losing Jesse Minter is a tough loss. I think losing Ben Herbert is a tough loss. And it certainly makes Sharon Moore's, his job a little more difficult. Now, I know that they have a lot of faith in, for those who don't know, Sharon Moore promoted Justin Tress, who's been a part of Ben Herbert's strength and conditioning staff, since he's been in Ann Arbor. And Sharon Moore had a lot of good things to say about him. He's like, Tress has been on Herbert's hip. He's been watching from him. He's learned from the best. He spent time out at Alabama. He got to learn from some of those guys as well. He even mentioned and I wondered this. I didn't know why, but Ben Herbert was always wearing black. Like I noticed that when you would see Ben Herbert on game day and even not on game day, like he was always walking around wearing the black stuff. Sherman Moore said that like the strength and conditioning coach, they all wear black. It's like a thing they do. And when you see one of them, you see all five of them. They're a close knit group. And so, we'll see what that means. But early on, it sort of feels like the right move was to keep as many pieces in house as you possibly could, based on what they had built. And so I don't know, man. Do you have a lot of confidence that Sherrone Moore is going to be able to get the right people in place? I know he was looking at a guy from Notre Dame. That one fell through. Notre Dame came back, made a counter offer. He's going to stay in South Bend. How do you see this staff evolving? How much confidence do you have in Sherrone Moore that he can continue the level of success that Harbaugh built?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I want to ask you a question about Ben Herbert. So, this is no knock on Ben Herbert because he's literally probably the best strength and conditioning coach in college football. But there are a ton of good strength and conditioning coaches out there that you don't ever hear about. Like normally the coaches don't talk them up like Jim Harbaugh talked up Ben Herbert. Like he wanted to make him the Broyles Award winner, I believe, a couple years back.
Yeah.
Do you think if Harbaugh would have never brought up Ben Herbert, just like almost every college coach does, like they don't, do you think the effect would be the same as it is now?
You mean in terms of how fans are perceiving it?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I don't know if the casual fan would have buy the vet. By the way, Matt Kirby. Yes, I'm leaning that way, but things are going to have to change here in the near future in order to make that happen. But in any event, I don't know if the casual fan would have felt the way that I think a lot of people feel at this point. But certainly, if you've ever, if you've ever been in Schembechler, if you've ever been around Ben Herbert on the sideline, like if you've ever seen the hype videos that the team puts out and like the way he communicates with them, the presence he has. There are certain people in this world, in whatever profession they have, they just have this aura about them. Like you can tell, like they operate on a different plane. I feel that way about JJ McCarthy. Like when he walks into a room, he's just got that something about him. When Jim Harbaugh walks into a room, he's got that. When Ben Herbert walks into a room, he's got that. So for anybody who's been within his vicinity or has, seen some of the videos of the way he communicates, I think people would have understood it. But yeah, to your point, if Jim Harbaugh hadn't spent a significant amount of time, like repeatedly saying, like, I don't think this guy gets enough credit for how good the team is. This is a guy who is the X factor of our program. He does this and he does this and he does this. I think it became apparent pretty quickly that this guy is a big part of why Michigan is so physically tough and why they're so mentally tough, why they feel like they are never out of a game. And I hope that, Tress is able to take those things and replicate it, because that's a really, really hard thing to do when you have a guy that has as much presence as he had. And Jim Harbaugh said it best, like, when he talked about the first time they met I think it was for the first interview, and Herbert walked in and wanted to shake him in the hand and like stared right into his eyes. And, Harbaugh's a confident guy, but Harbaugh felt like he had to look away, because when Ben Herbert looks at you, like, it's almost like he's looking into, beyond your face and into your soul to like dissect you and figure out what you're really all about. And, if you follow different shows or you listen to some of the players, there's been some pretty cool stories to come out about Ben Herbert. Joel Klatt shared one recently that he had heard from Blake Corum, where it was like the players arrived early. They were in their workout gear one morning during the offseason. They thought they were going to be doing a lifting session. And instead, Herbert unexpectedly had everybody get in fully clothed with their shoes on into the cold tub and spent some time into the cold tub. And then they got out and they walked around the practice facility, and there were free weights that were like chained together. And the goal was, I don't care how you guys pick this up. I think he divided them into two different teams and had them sort of work out a way to pick him up and carry him around. And that was one of the great things about Herbert, was that, yeah, the physical aspect of it was a big part of it, but how he prepared you mentally for, expect the unexpected. And what you experience here is going to be far worse than what you experience against Ohio State. I think that's why those guys went into these contests, and there was never a chance in their mind where they felt like they were going to lose a game. And you saw that play out in the field. 40-3 over the last 3 seasons, only lost one regular season game, and then the other 2 losses came in the playoff. I think Ben Herbert was a a huge reason for that, man. And so, yeah, I don't know how much of that is how much Jim Harbaugh spent time talking about him, and how much of it is like, if you follow the program closely, you just started to understand how important he was. Anything to add on the Ben Herbert thing before? I mean, he's a bald guy, so I automatically feel like it's a huge loss. There were so many good qualities about him.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody that was close to the program, and obviously the players completely showed you that with the way they reacted to the news. He was a huge part of the program. I mean, that's why Sharon Moore wanted to retain him as badly as he did. But yeah, with my point was, the way Harbaugh talked him up, I don't know that the casual fan would have thought, oh, okay, Michigan's losing their strength and conditioning coach, hire the next one. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know how much they would have actually realized that if it wasn't for Harbaugh.
Dude, I mean, Ben Herbert, I think I read this report on Fox Sports or something like that, but he invented like a weight bench while he was in Ann Arbor. He like got a patent on it and everything. It was built a little bit higher. It was designed to like stretch parts of your leg that regular weight benches won't stress. And he had to go out and get a patent on it. I mean, this guy was like, he operates differently. He thinks differently. And there's not a lot of people built like Ben Herbert. And I think for that reason, it's a huge loss. And yeah, Bobby from the Facebook page, how much of this do you subscribe to? Because I felt this when I heard he was going to the NFL. I feel like a guy like Ben Herbert is best suited for the collegiate level, because, you know, you have these young 18, 19, 20-year-old guys still impressionable, still looking to figure out who they are in this world. And I think if you're a guy like Ben Herbert, like, you can make a big impact on who they ultimately become. By the time you get to the NFL, not to say there's not guys there that need to grow and not need to mature and they don't need to, you know, grow physically and mentally, but it just seems like who he was and what his skill set was perfectly tailored for the college football game. Do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said earlier, I think that especially when you're a strength and conditioning coach, you've got a better chance to make that culture what you want it to be. And when you're talking about these professionals that are making buku dollars and they've got the egos and all that, it's not going to be as easy to yell at them and get what you want them to do. And at the college level, man, you can really shape these guys to how you want it to be. And I mean, that's a big reason why it shocked me that he left. I mean, he really, in my opinion, he had it made at Michigan.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, but then again, like, same thing as what I said about Jim Harbaugh. Like, if you have personal ambitions and there's something inside of you that wants to, you know, be a part of that in the NFL, like, I think it's hard for us to determine what anybody else's future should be or should look like. But yeah, from the outside looking in, it certainly felt like Herbert was perfect for the college game. And that doesn't mean he's not going to return at some point. But look, man, if you're checking boxes off, being able to be a part of an NFL coaching staff, I think is something that is, it's going to be attractive to a lot of people. I do want to get this up here. Let's see. The comment might be a little bit further up here before we transition into some of these 6 questions I want to ask you. We're at the 30-minute mark here, but yes, Matt Kirby, how about Roman Wilson balling out? I don't know if it's the Shrine, it's the Senior Bowl. I think he's taking part in, but it sounds like Roman Wilson's really helping his draft stock, making a lot of money for himself in the practices. We'll see what the game looks like on Saturday. I think it's on the NFL Network. Not sure exactly what time the kickoff is on that, but we'll have information up on the Winged Helmet as far as where you can tune in and watch that. But yeah, man, I mean, by all accounts, by the draft analysts that were there, by the the fans that were just in the building, the stadium watching, Roman Wilson is that dude. He was owning any cornerback that really tried to lock him up, making amazing catches. And it was more of, I think if you're a Michigan fan, you looked at it and you were like, it's pretty good. But we've come to expect that from Roman Wilson, especially over the last year and who he was and who he became. I mean, he's a big playmaker. I said it before the season, going into the season. I actually got a lot of pushback when I referred to him as JJ McCarthy's, wide receiver number 1, the top target, because a lot of people thought that was Cornelius Johnson. And not to take away anything from Cornelius Johnson, he also had a phenomenal season, but there was just something about Roman Wilson with the speed and how dynamic he was and how he could take the top off of defense. And then just the the way he was built mentally, the physicality. Like there's pictures that I took of him against Ohio State where like he's up in people's shit and he's talking trash and he's like, he's one of those guys you want on your roster, and he's certainly showing out at the Senior Bowl. I even saw, it might have been Jim Nagy. I can't remember who exactly what it was, but they were like, yeah, Roman Wilson is a top 10 wide receiver that's going to come off the board. Now, that's not to say he's a top 10 pick, but he will be selected among the top 10 receivers picked. Do you believe Roman Wilson has put himself in that category?
Yeah, I do. I think here's the way I look at Roman Wilson. And first off, I agree with you. At the beginning of the season, I was like, Roman Wilson is definitely going to be the top target for JJ. And he was. He had a great season. And if you put Roman Wilson in Oregon's offense, you put him in Washington's offense, he's going to explode. Like he's going to get a lot of catches because how fast he is, man. I mean, that's what he's showing at the Senior Bowl right now. He's showing the scouts what he is capable of. And I think that will definitely get him a top 10 receiver grade.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of comparisons. I know, Bobby, you're bringing it up here, but I've seen a lot of those comparisons to St. Brown for the Detroit Lions. Like, you know, I think St. Brown's got a little more weight on them, but the way that they play, the quickness, the way they can get out of the slot, get off the line of scrimmage with explosiveness, and then take the top off of defense, I think there's a lot of similarities there. So, I mean, you know, I get it's just a Senior Bowl practice, but congrats to him, man, because he's balling out. He's doing everything he needs to do. And look, everybody that's on the field, I saw somebody bring up on the Facebook page that it's reps and guys are going sort of half speed. Like, look, if you're going half speed for Senior Bowl practices, then you're doing it wrong. Like those guys know they're being filmed. They know that scouts are watching. Like you go to the Senior Bowl practice and the game to make sure you're making a name for yourself so that when draft day comes around, like people know who you are. So I don't buy into that sort of everybody's half-assing it sort of thing. And again, he's made some incredible catches, and there are people talking about Roman Wilson in a good way. And when that happens, that's certainly never a bad thing. So kudos to him. The game is on Saturday. It's on the NFL Network. We'll put up the information on how you can watch it. Some of the other guys competing in that game as well. I mean, I heard Jalen Harrell today is putting together one hell of a practice. Trevor Keegan's obviously there. AJ Barner is a part of that. Ladarius Henderson's there. There might be a few I'm missing. I know Mike Sainristil and Mike Barrett both pulled out. Mike Barrett's dealing with an injury that he didn't have during the season. Not sure what the specific reason was for Mike Sainristil to pull out. But at the end of the day, I think they've got 4 guys that are going to be in the game. They went down from 6. Is it
Braden McGregor?
Braden McGregor. So maybe they went from 8 to 6 participants. I can't remember. So we got Braden, we got Barner, we got Henderson, we've got Wilson, we've got Harrell. Not sure who else is on there. We'll put out the full list of guys that you can watch this Saturday. But in any event, congrats to him, man. Glad his stock is rising, and I'm excited to see what he does at the next level. In fact, Trent, I'm excited to see what a lot of these guys do at the next level because of what they meant to the University of Michigan, how important they were to the overall success of what we saw, not just the last 3 years, but over this past year in particular. And I put this out on social media, and a lot of people were in agreement on what I had put out. But make no mistake, there was definitely some pushback on this. And I want the fans, if you're watching, I want you to get involved because I want there to be some open dialogue here as we're approaching 40 minutes in the show. So yesterday I had put out that I thought we had witnessed 6 things during the 2023 season that I believe to be true. And if they are in fact true, again, it's something that's going to take a while to digest and really understand how great what we all witnessed really truly was. Could be something that takes, weeks, months, even years to really soak in. But I'm going to put these questions out there. And then I want you to tell me true or false. If it's true, give me your reasoning behind it. If it's false, give me your reasoning behind it. And then fans in the comments, obviously, if you want to chime in on this, would love to have you be a part of the conversation. So the first question I'm going to ask you, Trent, is in 2023, true or false, we witnessed the greatest defense in Michigan football history?
I mean, this might be a little bit of recency bias, but Michigan's had a lot of good defenses through the years, especially players, but I got to say true. I mean, these guys were loaded at every single position you could think of. They had somebody that was one of the best, man. I mean, edge rushers. You could rotate 4 or 5 of those guys in and out. You get great production. Your interior, rotate 5, 6 guys, great production, and you can just keep going back. And it's amazing how much rotating they did and how much production they got out of these guys. Yeah, dude, I think that it's got to be the greatest defense.
Easy, CJ. We're going to get to this one. We're going to get to this question here in a little bit, but go argue with your mama if you don't agree. I agree, man. Look, the only pushback I saw was people, referencing the 1997 season, and you can see it here in the comments, right? Let's see, pull it up here. 1997 was better. I think you can make a case. Obviously, Charles Woodson and part of that defense, a lot of solid guys that were a part of that defense. But yeah, I mean, this is one of those, and I was asking myself this when I put this out. Am I just a victim of recency bias, or did I really just see it happen? And when I go through this roster, when I look at guys like Mike Sainristil, Rod Moore, Will Johnson, Junior Colson, Mike Barrett, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Jalen Harrell, Braden McGregor, Derek Moore, like on and on and on, there was not a weakness on this defense. And the Michigan offense wasn't overly impressive. It wasn't explosive. They weren't putting up 50 points a game, but they were able to play the style of ball they played because the Michigan defense was so elite. I mean, second half adjustments, you weren't putting up points on this Michigan defense outside of what we saw against Alabama. But by and large, when this team went into halftime and they came out, that Michigan defense came out, if you didn't have a substantial lead at that point, which most teams did not, it wasn't going to happen for you. And so you talk about the depth, Trent. I also think that's a big part of it too, man. They were rotating a ton of guys. Didn't even mention guys like Keon Sabb, who had a phenomenal national championship game. I mean, he's a very underrated player. Makari Page is a guy who's coming back. So for my money, I feel like this was the greatest Michigan defense of all time. And even if you're somebody who's like, look, 1997 was better, or you can point to another year, the fact that it's even an argument, and a real argument, not like a bullshit argument, but this is a real debate now, whether or not we just saw the greatest defense in the history of Michigan football, which is saying a lot considering all the guys that came through. I think that really speaks to how good this defense was in 2023. So look, I can see a few dissenters, but it looks like by and large, most people agree that this was the greatest defense in history. So I don't have the gavel in front of me, but I'm gonna hammer the imaginary one down and say, yes, this was the greatest defense in Michigan football history. Now let's move to the running back position. Another one that I got some pushback on that was somewhat expected, but I put out that I believe in 2023, we witnessed the greatest running back in Michigan history in Blake Corum. And Trent, where do you stand on that?
So I'm a big Anthony Thomas guy, and I liked Mike Hart as well.
Shoulder pads,
dude.
The dark visor, the A-train. I mean, it's hard.
You just look at him and he was legit. Like just looking at the dude, like you knew he was good. But no, I've got to go with True again. Everything that he did for this team. If they were on the goal line, you knew they were going to score a touchdown. Giving the rock to Blake Corum, you knew he was going to score. They need 8 yards. He's going to keep churning those legs until he gets that 9 yards that they need. Like he could put this team on his back. The defense could know that Michigan was going to run the ball. They could put 10 in the box. Blake Corum would make it happen. And he did that for definitely the last 2 years. And he was pivotal his sophomore year with Hassan Haskins. I mean, he was legit, man.
Yeah, see, Scott Ryan, look, I appreciate the dialogue, but if you're going to say no, I'm going to need you to come with who it is. Who do you put in that place? I'm with a lot of the people on here that I certainly agree that Blake Corum was the greatest running back of all time. And I know that people, there were immediately people that wanted to show yards and career yards, and I get all that. But, in terms of points, I mean, Corum holds the all-time record. Career points, single season points. He scored more points. I think it's 168 points he was responsible for in 2023. No other Michigan player has done that. And time again, when Michigan needed to be able to lean on somebody, whether it was fourth and short, goal line situations, when you needed a guy to make a big play, That guy was Blake Corum. So what he did on the field was incredibly impressive. The other component to it is who he was in the locker room, the type of leader he was, the type of captain he was, the way that he didn't just lead by what he said. And I remember I had him on a podcast a while ago. This was, I think, maybe his sophomore year. And he said he was sort of making the transition from being the quiet guy to the guy that was a little bit more vocal. And then to see who he became during his senior year, I mean, he was a guy that led by example, led by his words, and he was a guy that you wanted to follow. And so I think from that standpoint, he was elite. And I don't know how much you want to take into account. And I'm not saying that these other guys on the list didn't do things within their community, but find me a guy who cared more about the Michigan community than Blake Corum. This was a guy who 24 hours after Michigan got their 1,000th win in Maryland was in Ipsy handing out turkeys to the community and giving out milk and holding, toy drives where he's giving away thousands and thousands of toys. And giving back was a big part of who he was and the legacy that he wanted to leave behind. And so, look, for all of those reasons, for the stats, for who he was in the locker room and the way that he really embraced his role as a captain, to who he was in the community, to me, Blake Corum is unquestionably the greatest running back to ever come through Ann Arbor. And you're going to have to do a lot of convincing to get me to think otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, Blake, and I feel like going back to this past year, he was a big reason why all these seniors came back for another year. Like if he goes to the pros, I don't know how many actually come back. Like I feel like he was a big reason keeping this team together. And look what they did. Obviously, there would have been some guys that came back, but I just have that feeling that Blake was a big part of that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, let's get into probably what was the most controversial take here. And I'm not sure why it was, but I get it. There's a long history of good quarterbacks at the University of Michigan. I wrote that Michigan had witnessed the greatest quarterback in Michigan football history in 2022 in J.J. McCarthy. Where do you stand on that?
He didn't put up gaudy stats or anything like that, but dude, he could make every throw that you would want a quarterback to make. Once again, like I said about Roman Wilson earlier, you put him in Oregon's offense like Bo Nix, or you put him in Washington's offense for Michael Penix. I think he puts up tremendous stats, and then you're looking at him as a possible top 5 pick in the NFL draft. I mean, he could literally make any throw that you want him to, but he was unselfish. He played for Michigan where they wanted to run the ball. That was their identity. He knew that. He knew that coming to Michigan, that what he was getting himself into. But he's a team player. He wanted to win. He did whatever the team asked him to do. Heck, they ran it, 32, 33 straight times against Penn State without him throwing a pass. And at the end of the day, he did everything that the team needed him to do. And just watching him play the game of football, like there's no doubt in my mind he's the best quarterback that I've seen play for Michigan. Yeah,
I think if you're stat watching, you look at where McCarthy ranks all time and in single season records where, he's 5th here, he's 4th there, he's down the list in certain areas. I think it would be easy for those people just looking at stats to say, nah, JJ McCarthy isn't that guy. But I agree with you, Trent. If you watch the way he plays, and I see a lot of people, they're advocating for Chad Henne because look, Chad Henne put up a lot of yards, a lot of touchdowns during his 4 years. Started as a true freshman, I believe, put up a lot of numbers during his time in Ann Arbor. But there are things that JJ McCarthy, let me put it this way. JJ McCarthy could do, and this is no disrespect, JJ McCarthy could do all of the things Chad Henne could do. Chad Henne could not do all of the things that JJ McCarthy could do. And I think that's the difference. Now, JJ McCarthy, to your point, played in an offense that wasn't necessarily designed for quarterbacks to put up big, gaudy numbers. Like McCarthy played his role and he played it well. And I think that's part of what made him so great is that there wasn't an ego involved. There wasn't like, I got to go out and sling it 40 times. It was like, whatever my team needs me to do in order for us to win, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And I think we can't really take that away from him. But dude, that throw against Western Michigan, where he rolls out to the right, throws it to the left across the field, hits Dalen Baldwin. I mean, how long has it been since you've seen a quarterback do that? The play he had in the Rose Bowl, the toss back from Donovan Edwards, where he reaches up, catches it with one hand, throws it 30 yards on a dime to Roman Wilson with pressure in his face. The fact that he could get out of the pocket, something Chad Henne really couldn't do. But J.J. McCarthy was a true dual threat quarterback. If you gave him space, he could get chunk plays. He wasn't like a burner, but I think at one point he said he could run like a 4.4. I don't know how official that is, but he was quick and he could pick up chunk plays. And so, again, same thing with Corum. Then it's who he was in the locker room, who he was within the community. There wasn't a person that J.J. McCarthy came in contact to, whether it was members of the team, members of the community. He just always left you with a positive impression, always made you feel like you were like one of the most important people he was talking to. Was just an incredible quality, an incredible young man. So for who he was on the field, the job he did, the athleticism he had, all the bags of tricks, and then who he was off the field. And Jim Harbaugh, don't take my word for it. Listen to Jim Harbaugh, who flat out said the greatest quarterback to ever play at the University of Michigan. I've seen some people bring up Tom Brady. Look, Tom Brady was a good quarterback at the University of Michigan, but he didn't become Tom Brady until he got into the NFL, and then his career really ascended. And so, yeah, would not put Tom Brady in the running for the greatest quarterback of all time.
Hey, Chris.
Certainly, go ahead.
Jim Harbaugh also said Alex Orji was going to be the greatest kick returner of all time. So
we've already said we can't take everything Jim Harbaugh says to heart, but when he says this about JJ McCarthy, because I believe it, because I subscribe to it, I take it as truth. So we'll go with that. Next question here, and probably more so actually than the quarterback question. This got the most pushback. So if you were around watching Michigan football like back in the early 1900s, this is probably going to piss you off a little bit. But I put on here that I think we witnessed the greatest head coach in Michigan football history in 2023. Now, I want to preface this by saying I understand that he missed 6 games during the regular season. I get that. But I think that what occurred over the last 3 years and what happened in 2023 put Jim Harbaugh in that category to where you could make a strong argument that he's the greatest head coach in Michigan football history. Trent, where do you stand on that?
This is the one that I feel like there's absolutely no doubt about. I mean, I want to remind everybody once again that Jim Harbaugh took over a really, really bad Michigan football program. I think they went 5-7 or whatever Brady Hook's last year was. And it took him a while to turn the ship around, but he did. I mean, 3 straight great years, 3 straight college football playoff appearances, topped it off with the national championship, beat Ohio State 3 straight years. I mean, man, when was the last time Michigan could say they beat Ohio State 3 straight years, Yeah. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that Jim Harbaugh is the greatest head coach at Michigan.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I saw people calling for I don't know, Jesus, was it Fritz Chrysler? I saw it was Fielding Yost. Like, I get it. I understand. Those guys won a lot of games in their day. I don't want to take anything away from them, but it's hard to compare eras, right? Because, back in the early 1900s, Michigan played who it played, but college football then isn't what college football is now. There was no, dude, go look at the athletes back then in the early 1900s compared to like some of the guys that are stepping on the field now. Like, they don't even look like they're the same species. Like, these guys are far faster, far bigger, hard hitters. I just think that to compete in today's college football, and then you have all the other circumstances of the transfer portal, which has been pretty good to Michigan football, NIL, the things that Jim Harbaugh had to deal with during his time in Michigan. I mean, it was clear that the NCAA wasn't a fan of the way Harbaugh was going about things, all the way from the satellite camps he implemented to when he first got to Ann Arbor to the way he would speak about revenue sharing with the players, and then ultimately having to serve 2 separate suspensions during the same season. And Michigan didn't skip a beat. In fact, they went 15-0, won the Big Ten, won the Rose Bowl, and won a national championship in that season. And I think that really speaks to what he created at the University of Michigan in terms of culture, in terms of the people that were in place, in terms of the players that were there. Jim Harbaugh was behind all of that. And so Yeah, I know a lot of people are going to look at Bo Schembechler, and he won a lot of games and he won a lot of Big Ten championships. But you know what he didn't win? He didn't win a national championship. And to me, I think I might have asked you this question a while ago, and it'd be interesting to see how people answer this. Lloyd Carr, hold on, 122 and 40 should be higher, but he was quiet, gentlemen. Yeah, I mean, look, we all love Lloyd Carr. Jim Harbaugh's winning percentage is higher than Lloyd Carr, but I think Harbaugh is slightly, maybe even one spot behind Lloyd Carr in total wins. Where the hell was? See, Matt Kirby, you threw me off. What question was I going to ask you? Where was I going with that? There was something about Jim Harbaugh.
You said you asked me a question a while ago.
Oh, that's what it was. As it relates to Bo Schembechler and all the Big Ten titles that he won. What's the exchange rate? What's the currency rate? Like if you were going to trade one national championship, how many Big Ten championships would it require for you to make that trade? Like
okay,
you're going to give up Natty for a Big Ten championship.
So you asked me this question, I think, when they actually got to the college football playoff.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's the exchange rate there? One Natty for how many Big Ten championships? What's the value?
Dude, I mean, at that point in time, I think everybody wanted to see Michigan win a national championship. I mean, heck, I would have given away all the Big Ten titles just for that Natty. To me, I mean, if you can win the national championship, not that who cares about Big Ten championships, but who cares about Big Ten championships?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, you know, I don't know that you can, you know, if somebody had to say, I'll give up 30 conference championships in Michigan football history, if we could win it all in 2023, if you took a poll, I think most people would have signed on for that and said, give me the national championship. I mean, that's how much value there is in it. So I get that people are going to view Bo Schembechler as the greatest of all time and you know, Fielding Yost and Fritz Chrysler and what all those guys did, but they didn't have to deal with the transfer portal. They didn't have to deal with NIL. They didn't have to deal with a lot of the shit that head coaches have to deal with now in college football. And it is worth noting that Jim Harbaugh, in addition to winning a national championship this year, is the only coach in Big Ten history to win 3 straight outright conference championships. And he's the only coach in conference history to go 15-0. And so I don't know, man. I think I'm there to where I would name him the greatest coach in Michigan football history. The only knock against him that I have personally is that he didn't stay to continue to build on it. That's the issue I have, is that he did all of that, and it was incredible. And the only thing better would have been for him to step to the podium after beating Washington and saying, look, I'm coming back. My job is here at Michigan, and we're going to ride this thing until there's nothing left, you know, and continue to build on what it took so long to build. And unfortunately, the story didn't play out that way. And, you know, now it's Sharon Moore. But in terms of Harbaugh's legacy, I don't know, man. It's another one of those questions where it's like you might disagree with it, but there's a strong argument that can be made that Jim Harbaugh is in that spot, and Trenton certainly sounds like you agree with it. Here's another one that received a little bit of pushback, and I understand that given how successful the last few seasons have been, and then some of the great games that have taken place in the Big House. But I said that Michigan football fans witnessed the greatest game in Michigan football history this year, and it didn't happen in the Big House, but it happened in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. Where do you stand on that? Where does that game rank all time for you?
So I think I'm going to go false here, but if you don't mind, I would like you to go first and give me your reasoning as to why you think this.
I will do that. And maybe part of it's because I was there. But you know, there were a lot of factors that went into play. One, growing up and watching Michigan go out and compete in the Rose Bowl, to me was like, that was like the best thing you could do other than the Big House, was to watch Michigan go out and play in Pasadena. And so not only does Michigan have the opportunity to go play in the Rose Bowl, but you got to face Nick Saban, who had more success in the college football playoff by far than any other coach. And a lot of people going into that game thought Michigan was going to get dragged. Hell, they thought Michigan, based on a reaction from a clip in a ballroom, that Michigan didn't even want to play Alabama, that they were just like, we're about to get our asses kicked. This game is over. And not only did it not go that way, but Michigan faced some adversity in that game, and it looked like Michigan was going to fall into some old habits, and it looked like Alabama was going to pull it out and that they were going to be the ones going to the national championship game. And the way that Michigan rallied late, forced the game into overtime, and then win it with Blake Corum touchdown, and then a defensive stop where the defense has been critical all year. And then knowing that that win over that team in that venue was sending you to the national championship game. It was Michigan getting over that hump. Instead of a third straight loss in the semifinal, you come out, you face Alabama, and you get over the hump, and you go to Houston and win it all. To me, I think that's the greatest game in Michigan football history. It was interesting from start to finish. It was a true battle. It was college football in every sense of the word. Beating Ohio State in 2021 was great. Being there in Columbus in 2022 was phenomenal. Hell, what happened in 2023 was great against the Buckeyes. But for me, that Rose Bowl game, man, to put it in perspective, that Rose Bowl game to me was more exciting and more enjoyable than the national championship game. And I've seen a lot of people echo those sentiments as well. So I'll throw it back to you, Trent. But those are my reasonings for why it was the greatest game.
To me, I mean, that Rose Bowl game is definitely one or two. The only game and maybe it's because I was there and I wasn't at the Rose Bowl game, but the only game that I think that could beat that was the 2021 game against Ohio State. I mean, Michigan, it was so long since Michigan beat Ohio State. And I mean, they absolutely throttled them. And I feel like that could have been a game where it's like, oh no, here we go again, another loss against Ohio State. But I feel like that was the tone setter for the next 2 years after that. All these players knew at this point in time, because Michigan didn't play Ohio State in 2020 because it got canceled. These players only knew beating Ohio State. And I feel like that was so important to the culture in Ann Arbor and just for what happened this year. Like there was no more of, oh no, it's Ohio State, like we can't beat them type of thing. It's, hey, it's Ohio State. We're going to beat them. We're going to throttle them. And look what Michigan's done the past 2 years after that 2021 game. So yeah, I mean, that Rose Bowl game, I mean, it was critical, obviously. And I mean, just watching that game on TV was like, that was awesome. But I feel like that 2021 game was the tone setter for what we've seen.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I was there, and the snow was falling, and the fans rushed the field, and it was like so much of like, as a Michigan fan, you just got used to getting your ass kicked year in and year out, and that was just the way things worked at the end of November. And then you'd have to spend a whole offseason, quite frankly, doing what Ohio State fans were doing now, which is clinging to recruiting rankings and saying, oh, next year is going to be the year. Like, you didn't have to do that because Michigan took care of business, and they did it emphatically. I mean, Hassan Haskins, 5 rushing touchdowns, hurdling over guys. I mean, that game was an incredible game. And if I was putting together my list, I think the 2021 game against Ohio State, probably number 2. And then, to be honest, 2022 in the shoe where Michigan hadn't won in 2 decades, that probably goes number 3. And as weird as it sounds, the national championship win over Washington, I probably put number 4. And I don't know why that's the case. I mean, you win the greatest game, that you do everything you hope to do. You win college football's biggest prize. But I think a lot of that was because Michigan just flat out dominated from start to finish. There was never really a moment where it felt like Michigan was going to lose that game. Certainly doesn't take away from how important it was. But in terms of like greatest games and what it meant to the fan base and what it felt like to watch that, I would go Rose Bowl versus Bama, 2021 versus Ohio State, 22 versus Ohio State, and then 23/24 against Washington. That's where I'm at.
Going back to the national championship game,
creatures of the moment, says Tyrone. We may be.
It's very possible. But the Natty, I feel like there was just so much going on. Like it was hard to actually soak it in and enjoy it because right afterwards, all you hear is Jim Harbaugh staying at Michigan, or is he off to the NFL? And then shortly after, you find out, hey, he is leaving and he's going to the Chargers. And then you start hearing about assistant coaches leaving. You hear Ben Herberts leaving. I just feel like it was so hard to really just be like, hey, Michigan won, and like just soak it in because of everything happening.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's fair for fans to feel that way and be concerned about what the program is going to look like in the future. There's a lot of people who want to serve as like the gatekeepers of fandom, like, because Michigan won a national championship 3 weeks ago, you're not allowed to be concerned. Like, you should just feel happy, put the blinders on and just be happy. But I think fans can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, on one hand, you can be extremely excited and appreciative of the fact that Michigan won it all and you had the chance to witness that in your lifetime. But you can also look forward and say, okay, this is a completely different program now than it was 3 weeks ago. And what does that mean moving forward? And start to ask those questions. And so, yeah, I do think that the yearly sort of, is he going to stay? Is he going to go thing? That was, it took a lot of the oxygen and joy out of celebrating what had just happened. And I'm not saying that I'm happy that he's gone. I'm just glad that they finally decided to make that decision, that Jim Harbaugh made that decision. And the good news is I don't think we're going to get that with Sherrone Moore year in and year out. I think now that he's gotten this job, he is committed to being at the University of Michigan for the foreseeable future. So I'm happy with that. But again, I've got questions about what this program is going to look like. You lose 20 guys to the draft, and it's not just 20 random guys. It's your entire offensive linemen, your best wide receivers, best defensive players. You're bringing back a lot of talent, but damn, you're losing a lot of guys to the draft. And then, oh, by the way, you got to replace your head coach. You got to replace your DC. You got to replace your strength and conditioning coach. It is going to be an uphill battle, and I think people are going to have to be patient with Sherrone Moore. The idea that this team is going to come out in 2024 and with the new schedule that's in place, with the new, the way the Big Ten is going to operate in terms of no divisions, the new college football playoff model, it is a different landscape for Sherrone Moore than what Jim Harbaugh had to deal with. And I think you're just going to have a little bit of patience. I don't think we've got another undefeated season on deck. Not that I don't want to see it, but the idea that this team's going to go 12-0 during the regular season, to me, just I have a hard time believing that at this moment in time. And then, you haven't really been able to take advantage of the transfer portal yet. And so there's a lot of things that need to sort themselves out. The final question I'm going to ask, true or false, and I think if there's any question here that we're all going to be unanimous on, as we are now at 1 hour and 6 minutes, I put down that this was the greatest season in Michigan football history. 15-0. You beat Ohio State for the third straight time. You win your third straight Big Ten championship. You go to the Rose Bowl. You beat Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide in overtime. And then you go down to Houston and you win a national championship against Washington. To me, this was the greatest season in Michigan football history. Trent, agree or disagree?
Agree. And I don't think there's a whole lot to say about it. I mean,
yeah,
I think that if anyone's going to argue, it'll be the 97 season. But hey, Michigan went 12-0. They won the Big Ten championship game, which wasn't around back then, and they won 2 playoff games, which wasn't around back then, and they absolutely dominated in the national championship game. This team was loaded, and it's something that I don't think anyone can ever forget. The 2023 Michigan Wolverines.
No, never. I mean, just a legendary team, loaded with talent on both sides of the ball. And when I go back through the list, when you say, greatest defense in Michigan football history, greatest running back in Michigan football history, greatest quarterback, greatest head coach, greatest game in Michigan football history, greatest season in Michigan football history. Look, man, that's a lot to digest. That's a lot to take in. And I think that it's something that over the course of time, whether it's months or years, at some point, you're going to be looking back and you're going to think about this 2023 team and everything they did. And this will go down as the greatest team of all time, the greatest season of all time. And how fortunate are we to think about how many people are fans of, fanatics of their sports teams, the teams that they love, and they never get to experience anything like that. They never get to see that team win a national championship. They never get to see that team go undefeated. We got to see that. We got to experience that. And in some cases got to see it happen firsthand and be in the mix. And I just, it's hard to put it into words, but I think the fact that we're all unanimous, I don't think that's a matter of being a creature of the moment. I think that is an undeniable fact that we all just witnessed the greatest season in Michigan football history, which says a lot when you have, more program wins than any other program in the country, and just how good this program has been over such a long period of time. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it, man. This was an incredible season that we should all look back on, be grateful for, but also it's okay to look ahead and be a little bit concerned and wonder and hope if Michigan can continue to build on all of the success they worked so hard to create the last 3 years. So anything else you want to add to the conversation, Trent?
Yeah, I'm just kind of, I'm ready to see what Sharon Moore is going to do going forward. I know he said that he wants to get his staff finalized here in the coming, hopefully next week, I think is what he said, or maybe the end of the week, but excited to see what he does there, see what he does at the defensive coordinator spot, see what he does at offensive coordinator. I know he's wanting to retain as many coaches as possible. So there'll definitely be a lot of talking points going forward, revolving around the current roster and team.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And we're going to be plugged into it. And we're, like I've said a million times, we're committed to making sure we stay on top of it, bring you all of that information as it comes, stay on top of the breaking news. And there's going to be a lot of it over, the next weeks. And as Sharon Moore continues to assemble his team and put pieces together and, watch the transfer portal, see what happens. Like, do we see any Michigan Wolverines jump ship? Do we see any guys come in? Like, the season might be over, but there's still a lot of things that are going to happen here in the near future that I can't wait to cover. Can't wait to hop back on with you, Trent, talk about those things. I'll leave it with what Matt Kirby said. A lot of people want to debate about that 1997 season. You know what 1997 didn't have? Didn't have the winged helmet covering that program, and I think that really settles the debate there. So, Trent, TK, my guy, making time. Look at an hour and 11 minutes. You said you were wondering if this was going to be as good of a show as the last one. I think it was better. I think this was a better show. Great topics, great engagement from the fans. Hard to complain.
Yeah, man, I agree. Hour and 11. It's longer than the last one. There's a reason for it.
A lot of length here in the shows. That's right. Still tipping, CJ. We'll be back next Thursday. Appreciate you all. Thanks for joining in.